This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 145.
It's that orchestration of that progression of the problems that you give them, that working together they'll start to see the nuances that I would normally have to feel like I had to explicitly instruct. So yeah, it's been kind of a real game changer.
Welcome to a real world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here for the first time in a long time without my co-host, Mr. Matt, the back-to-school man Rogers. Tonight was back-to-school night for Matt, and it just was not going to be realistic for him to join our recording. So I had the pleasure of speaking solo with the 2023 Hawaii Teacher of the Year, Dr. Michael Ida. And it was a great conversation. It kind of fell right in my wheelhouse. If you've listened to this show time and time again, I talk about student-centered learning. I talk about project-based learning and my passion for it and my use of it in the different classes and different grade levels that I've taught. And we jumped full force into that conversation with Mike tonight. He is a computer science teacher. He is an AP Calc teacher. And it was really interesting to hear about his progression in the style of instruction that he's taken on in his computer science classes and how it has progressed into his math class. He is empowering his students. He is facilitating classrooms that rely on group conversation, group discussion, and students working through the content with their peers. He's really transformed the way he teaches it, and it's really inspiring to see. We talk a lot about instruction. We talk a lot about pedagogy. We talk a lot about strategies to make this realistic in your classroom and how to tackle it in an elementary classroom, as well as someone teaching something as high level as the AP courses in your high school. So I would highly encourage you to tune into this conversation and check out the strategies that he's using and the way that he is empowering his students to be successful in the classes that he teaches. So let's hear from Teach Better real quick and then jump right into that conversation with Michael Ida.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Michael. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Oh, great. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to learn from you and jump into this conversation. So kick things off nice and simple for us. Please officially introduce yourself. Let our audience know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Sure. I'm Michael Ida. I'm the 2023 Hawaii State Teacher of the Year. So I'm here in Honolulu. I teach high school math, actually math and computer science. So I started my career 27 years ago teaching math, and then about 10 years ago switched to computer science as kind of my primary line. So excited to talk with you about STEM and your program there.
So this is not super important, but I'm just curious. It's interesting in my district. STEM has been growing over the past, we'll say 5 or 6 years. It started as a middle school program is where it really took off. It's trickled down to elementary, and now at the high school level, the woodshop classes and the metalworking classes have started to transform the way they look at their curriculum and STEM. But in middle school and elementary school, STEM falls under the science category. But then when you get to high school, computer science class and programming classes, they all of a sudden fall under the math umbrella. So in your position, do you feel as though you still wear a math hat all day, or do you have a closet full of hats as you've transformed that position in computer science, or Where do you feel that kind of falls now in your position?
Yeah, sure. That kind of really resonates with me because here in Hawaii, CS kind of falls a little bit between the cracks, like you're describing there. There's some debate as to whether we should be part of CTE or math or science. So I'm because I'm started my career as a math teacher and I'm still the department head for math. I kind of just bring it under the umbrella of math. But we do have like a robotics teacher and he teaches engineering also. So that falls under CTE. And of course, there's some overlap with what we do. So yeah, so for us too, we kind of fall in this weird sort of in between area where we're not quite sure where we fit in. But yeah, it's been interesting because our engineering teacher, he kind of does more the, the a lot of the kind of hands-on vocational stuff, and I do a lot of the, the more cerebral, the programming part. So yeah, finding a place for ourselves is sometimes a challenge. Yeah,
There's also advantages to it as well because you don't always have someone looking over your shoulder, so you really have the freedom to explore and
sure,
experiment.
absolutely. Yeah,
So what was your motivation to jump into computer science prior to, you said about 10 years ago you moved into that field. I'm
about 10
curious,
years
did you
ago.
have
Yeah.
experience in it through either just personal passion projects or other work experience? What led you to that transition into computer science?
Sure, I was fortunate enough, I'm 54, so when I was in high school, that was in the mid 80s, but I was fortunate enough to have gone to a school that did offer some programming classes in high school. In those days it was on like a big mainframe, but that kind of lit the bug for me. So even though in college I didn't major in computer science, it was always kind of an interest for me, like you're saying. So I'd always kind of kept up with it, and on my own, just as kind of a hobby, I'd done some programming over the years. And about 10 years ago, kind of all the pieces fell into place. We had a really supportive administration, and we still do. And we had some funding, so it seemed like things were kind of lining up for that. So I just went for it and proposed it to my admin, and everything kind of followed from there.
Interesting. So over the last 10 years, I'm sure that position has rapidly changed in that 10-year window. So what is your mindset in terms of you preparing to facilitate your classroom in your understanding, your growth, not only in your teaching style, but your knowledge of programming and everything that comes under the umbrella of computer science. What has your mindset been in that 10-year window, and how has that mindset possibly had to shift even more in the last 3 or 4 years?
Sure. Yeah. When I first started, it's interesting because when I first started, I tried to bring in a lot of, the teaching techniques and the structure that I had in my math classes, but quickly found that didn't really transfer over too well. I mean, a lot of people think, CS and math, there's kind of a natural affinity between the two. And, in some sense there is, but as far as teaching, I've found, and I'm still finding it, it's kind of a totally different animal. So with CS, I think the big thing about it and really the advantage, I think the good thing as a teacher is that number one, kids can see applications all around them, so there's a lot of kind of intrinsic motivation that they have going into it. And it's such that, we can really do really project-based things, not so much in math, but really in CS, I really found that project-based is really the way to go with kids, because if they have an end in mind, they're building an app to do something or they're making a game. It really kind of motivates them and carries them along. So, as a teacher, my thinking about pedagogy really and assessment in CS has really kind of gone a radical shift from kind of the more traditional math oriented way that I started to now where it's really I just do all project based and it's all kind of kids working in groups and collaborating and very little of me kind of stand and deliver that old method. So
Mhm.
it's been a huge shift.
How how do you how do you actively monitor your student? I love that type of working environment, and it was something that I always strive to create in my own classroom. And I found that at least in my experience, and I'd be curious of your opinion. You hear the guide on the side, and become a facilitator, and it's all fluff. It's just fun phrases, but there's no real direction in what that actually looks like. And I found that active monitoring, impromptu and planned mini lessons, and questioning became probably my three most important teaching strategies in that project-based learning environment. So I'm curious what you would say your most important teaching strategies are in that facilitator guide on the side role.
Sure. Yeah. It's something that I'm still learning and still developing and still growing as a teacher. It's, like you said, it's one thing to say, those platitudes, guide on the side, as opposed to a sage on the stage. But really implementing that, it's tough. Really, I mean, people think, oh, project based, you just give them a project and let them go. But it's not quite that easy if you really want them to, hit the standards. It requires, really careful orchestration as far as making sure that as the kids progress through their project, they're going to hit the content that you want them to see. So it's, as you said, it's kind of
As we
sorry
hear,
about
Mike is still in school.
that.
The time zone differential here. I am recording in my basement. My children are already asleep, and Mike is still putting in the
Yeah,
burning
we
the
got
oil at school.
those bulletin announcements. But sure, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's for me the most challenging part was making sure that the groups are functioning, and that there's group accountability as well as individual accountability, and making sure that you know uh, the common the common complaint that kids have is, oh, one kid does all the work and everybody else kind of just rides the coattails. Just so making sure that there is that individual accountability at the same time that they have that group cohesion coming in. And that for me has been kind of the biggest challenge, I think, especially I noticed since we're coming back from the pandemic and kids kind of missed out those years on that collaborative, that social interaction, those skills that they normally would develop naturally. They're kind of missing out on that. And so I noticed, especially coming back from the pandemic, have to often explicitly instruct, about how to just interact socially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I I like to use a grocery store or a food store analogy to describe active monitoring. So I don't know if you've ever experienced going to a brand new grocery store or going to your favorite grocery store and they redo all the aisles. And you go with 10 items on your list. And instead of being there for 15 minutes, it takes you an hour.
Hmm.
You walk up and down every aisle looking for item number three. And then you look at item number four and you walk up and down the same aisles. You're like trying to hit one at a time because you don't know where anything is. And active monitoring can feel like that, trying to gauge where everyone's at times. And I found that creating those, and you kind of reference this, creating those checkpoints along the way, making sure, one, that's how you ensure that they're hitting the standards and those learning objectives that you set in the project. But it's also a way for you to have a standard time where you meet with a group.
Hmm.
When you get to checkpoint
Uh-huh.
one, you have to check in with me. Let's
Hmm.
have a conversation. You are now ensuring that section one of the project is done completely and they're ready for section two, and now you can explain that
Hmm.
portion. But also it allows you to say, nope, you didn't do
Um,
XYZ of section
yeah,
one,
yeah.
go back
Uh-huh.
and do that. It
Uh-huh.
allows you to control pacing because
Hmm.
you can't have groups up to section five of the project and others on section one without at least you knowing.
Uh-huh.
It allows you to motivate groups that
Right.
aren't getting done that section. They're falling behind. You can look and say, wow, I've never checked in with this group on section one. So those forced check-in points align to, like you said, hitting those learning objectives, but also allow you to really have more control over the active
Uh-huh.
monitoring
Mm,
process.
mm, mm,
Um, the other thing for me was questioning. And those, when you stop at a group and they're struggling at a moment that you kind of anticipate, and I'm sure you've seen when you do the project the second or third time,
uh-huh.
where those pitfalls are going to
Yeah,
come with the
yeah,
groups.
yeah.
I love on the fly teaching. I
Uh-huh.
love, I love running, flying off the hip with my teaching. But I found that if I planned questions for moments I anticipated, my questions were so much more effective than if I
Mm,
was just doing everything,
uh-huh.
flying with the wind. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Have you found? Do you teach any math classes at all anymore?
I teach one math. That's AP Calc. Yeah.
Okay, so AP Calc is an interesting class for me to ask this question. Has your teaching style in CS bled into your teaching style in AP Calc at all?
It has, that's a really interesting question. I mean, it has in the sense that, with AP Calc, we're currently implementing it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with building thinking classrooms, Peter Liljedahl. But it's a strategy it's a framework really, not really a curriculum for getting kids to collaborate. Not something unusual, not something new, but the centerpiece of that framework is vertical whiteboards, and kids are kind of in random groups and so forth. So really what has kind of transferred back from the CS side to the math side is kind of the experience that I've had with groups, orchestrating groups, and that in math has been really helpful, to make sure that there's participation, individual accountability, and getting that um, engagement from everybody. So yeah, I think it's really the group orchestration piece that has kind of transferred back into the math side.
How does it how does it affect your pacing, your stress of pacing? Because my comment of AP Calc is a good one to ask this for. That's those AP classes, regardless of content, are the most stressful classes for pacing because you are under so much pressure to make sure you prepare your students to be successful on an AP test. There's when you're teaching eighth grade science, yes, there is pressure for state testing, but it's not. I have come to learn it is not the same as AP classes. So how do you allow that to impact your stress of pacing, or how have you seen bringing in more of the group dynamics impact your pacing in any way?
Sure. Yeah. The pacing, like you said, it's pretty tight for AP classes, especially for AP Calc. So, as far as our progression through the different topics in the curriculum, that's pretty tight. But within, having said that, though, the interesting thing is within the class period, um, I've been a little bit more, I've become, I should say, a little bit more, kind of flexible and more on the fly as far as orchestrating those kind of interactions with kids and their development of the understanding. Whereas before, I would have kind of a longish type of whole group instruction, lecture for most of the period. But
I'm
now,
sorry to interrupt. Are
oh,
your
sure.
classes 45 minutes, or are you block
Great
scheduling?
question. So we're not quite block, but we are kind of a alternating A B schedule. So our periods are 75 minutes. So in the past, I would have, if you had come into my AP Calc class, say 10, 15 years ago, you would have seen, most of that time is me standing and delivering, doing the kind of lecture thing. But now with the building thinking classroom strategies that we're implementing, and my experience with CS, my class huddle, if you want to call it that, what would pass for whole group instruction, maybe 10 minutes, and then the rest, kids are working together. So it's really kind of changed a lot. Whereas before I would, with my whole class instruction, okay, go over, go dig into the topic, maybe 3 or 4 examples to show a progression from easy to hard. But now, just given the bare minimum, send them off, and then through their interactions in groups and working together at their whiteboards, their vertical whiteboards, then as long as I kind of carefully orchestrate the problems that I feed them, they can start to discover all the nuances of the topic, and kind of the pitfalls, and the kind of the tricks of the trade, without having me explicitly teach them. So it's been kind of a sea change for me in that sense.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding correct. AP Calc math teacher, You are acknowledging the fact that you do not have to directly instruct all of the content in your classroom.
Yes.
You strategically provide the
Uh-huh.
students the opportunity in a well orchestrated, well planned, extremely thought out process by you. They can navigate their way through the content and succeed, and it has an effect, and you found a way for it to not negatively impact your pacing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So most of our time, like I said, will be kids working, working together. And it's in that interaction, it's really the orchestration of as they're working, working in groups at their whiteboards. I'm just as they finish one problem, we kind of check in and just keep feeding them more problems. And it's that orchestration of that progression of the problems that you give them, that working together they'll start to see the nuances that I would normally have to feel like I had to explicitly instruct. So yeah, it's been kind of a real game changer for me in that way.
I I love hearing this because that was my teaching style when I taught fifth grade. That was my teaching style when I taught elementary STEM. And I am a firm believer that it is an extremely effective way for students to learn. And it is a much more effective way to keep them engaged. And it is a much more effective way to build skills that they can carry past the classroom outside of the content. As a secondary instructional coach, at times it's hard for me to convince an AP Calc teacher, not that our AP Calc teachers are fantastic. I took calculus in college, I minored in math, but I'm not at the instructional level they are. I've never facilitated an AP classroom. And so sometimes I just have to I can't project my real thoughts that it is possible. So what's the secret sauce? What would you say is a way for any teacher, not just necessarily AP Calc, any teacher that looks at their lesson framework and says, I want to lecture less. I want my students to actively work in groups and build these thinking classrooms. What are some key components that they can start to do it and try it with a single lesson, or maybe a week long set of skills where they see that opportunity to try it?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. I think a lot of it is kind of the mindset that you go in with is trusting your kids. I mean, that's kind of a big one, is releasing that control, releasing that the power that you have, and that's kind of to me that's kind of the biggest block that people have. I mean, in math, I think the way I started was I thought about if I did my traditional stand and deliver lecture, what would be the series of examples that I would present to kids to show them, okay, we're going to start with a basic, and then we're going to do one that's has maybe a twist to it, and then maybe one that has a couple of twists to it. So think about the progression of examples that you would show them, and then instead of showing them, you set those as kind of a series of problems as kids are working together. Then you just gradually feed them those problems as prompts for them to work together on. It's really just kind of taking that leap of faith, I think, for me is what it was. And I think part of it was the timing, because as we're coming back from the pandemic, you know, from there, kind of, we had kind of in a sense a blank slate to try new things. And so that kind of gave me the impetus to think about, okay, I've been reading this, and we've had some PD as a department, so let me just kind of go with it. I mean, AP Calc was the only class I had in math, so that was the only that was the only choice I had. But I think for especially, I mean, thinking in terms of math, I think one way, if teachers were thinking about how to start, think about what would be the examples that you would show them through like a lecture or whole class instruction, and then take those as problems to feed them to work on themselves in a group. And that progression, as they work through those problems, they'll start to see for themselves, the nuances of the topic that you would normally feel like you had to show them.
That makes sense. How does the student mindset and the student's abilities to succeed in a classroom like this change from September, October to November?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, for us, we started school. So our first day of school was, first day of August. So we've been in
Okay.
school for a little over a month. And, coming in, the kids that I have for AP Calc, they've been used to kind of the traditional approach. They've done well in that. And so that's kind of what their expectation is coming in. And so there was a little bit of trepidation, so the first, week or so was just kind of establishing those norms and just kind of getting used to this new framework. But I've seen some amazing growth in kids, just over the past month. Kids who came in, who were very, very successful in the traditional approach,
Right,
but
especially being AP kids. That's the
exactly,
student type
yeah,
of student you're
yeah,
going to have.
uh-huh, uh-huh. And I've seen them really blossom, as far as being able to, not only communicate with their peers, but really be able to um, share their ideas and communicate, what their thought process is in a way that their peers can understand. And it's been, it's really amazing to see those kind of, the quiet and shy kids, like you're saying, who typically end up in AP Calc. Um, you come into my classroom and there's just a buzz. There's excitement, there's conversation going on, and this is sustained for 75 minutes, which you think if you do a traditional lecture, by the time half an hour rolls around, the kids are just the kids are just kind of lost it already. But yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing journey, and it still is an amazing journey, and it's just in a month, not even a full quarter, you can see the growth and you can see the engagement that kids have. So it's, for me, it's just been, professionally, it's been a huge, it's been a huge win.
Right. Yeah, I always found, and I've said this before on the show when talking about things like student centered learning and small group instruction, you have to invest that time into the students to build their capabilities to succeed in a classroom like that because they're most likely not used to it. But it happens quicker than you would think.
Hmm.
And, I think you probably see you get your students to the point where you want them to be quicker now because you know where you want it to be. You're more comfortable. The first time you try this, you're trying to figure it out. As they're trying to figure out, it might take a little bit longer. But once you know what you expect out of them, you get to that student mindset quicker, and it has profound impacts later in the year. You might
Absolutely.
fall a little
Yeah.
bit behind in the beginning of the year.
Uh,
It might not be where you want in the beginning of the year, but when you hit that middle of the year, you are just at such a stride that is so rewarding. Like you said, the buzz that you see from the classroom, and the way they learn, the way they interact with, it's so rewarding. It's so
uh,
invigorating. It's
Absolutely.
such a
Yeah.
motivating
Uh,
environment
uh,
to be a part of. So I love hearing this. I love hearing how you're doing this in a stressful class like AP Calc.
uh, uh.
Um, so, jumping back to computer science, what exactly do you teach your kids? What do they learn in a computer science classroom? And do you have multiple levels? Tell us about that.
Sure, yeah. So we have the introductory class. So this is, for kids who may not have any programming experience. And then we have AP. So there's, as you might know, for APCS, there's two classes. There's APCSA, and there's APCS principles. And they're very different. The APCSA, that's kind of the traditional, that's really focused on the coding aspect. And then the principles has kind of come online. That's a new one that College Board has brought out, probably within, if I remember correctly, it's been about maybe 5 years, and so it's a relatively new one. That one is specifically designed to be accessible, to a wide range of kids, not just those who would traditionally think of being the programmer type. So we basically have two levels, and thinking about like you're saying, what we teach kids has kind of changed radically over the years. In the beginning, when I first started, I kind of went back to how I was taught programming, and so started with some text-based languages. The traditional. You start with learning about variables, and then you do loops and things. So you kind of the ground up. But as I've transitioned more into kind of a project-based, I've also thought about. I've also changed how we introduce those concepts. So instead of isolating them one by one and kind of doing a kind of a ground up. I do more project based. So in the context of doing their projects, they'll learn about variables and loops and conditionals. And I also start with blocks. I start with, I'm not sure if you've heard of Snap, which is kind of like Scratch. And so start kids off with that. And they quickly discover, a lot of kids will be, oh, okay, when are we going to get to the real programming? But, they quickly discover that, oh, okay, there's actually some pretty sophisticated things you can do with blocks. And so, yeah, so we spend quite a bit of time on blocks before trying to transition in. Um, but yeah, so I've thought about, especially nowadays, with artificial intelligence tools coming online, it's also causing me to really think about where do we go from here? Because when ChatGPT first, became really available for us to try out, I fed it a lot of prompts that I would normally give, my intermediate kids, for writing, say, Python programs, and it would just spit them out.
I was
Perfect.
really curious. That was on my list to ask you because I've explored a lot with AI, but I haven't explored it at all on the coding side.
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
please continue.
Yeah, so it spit them out. I mean, and pretty sophisticated too. So over the summer, yeah, I did that at the end of last year. I kind of was playing around with it, and I saw the capabilities. And so over the summer, I really kind of started to think about, okay, where are we going to go from here? Um, I can't just give them those same old assignments that I would normally give them, because obviously then they can ask ChatGPT for those. So my thinking on it is kind of evolving. I'm thinking that we really want to focus. What is it? I guess the question I'm asking myself is, what is it that a human can bring to a field like software development that something like ChatGPT or whatever the next successor to it is not going to be able to bring. And to me, it's more the creativity, in kind of that bigger thinking about how do we solve a problem and how do we make it human friendly. So it's really that kind of the humanity that we bring to the table that I don't think AI is going to be able to replace us, anytime soon on that. So my projects that I've been giving kids I've really been trying to build in that creative aspect to it. Not only thinking about the coding, how do you actually get it to do what you want it to do, but how do we make it ergonomic? How do we make it user friendly? Let's focus on the user interface. Let's make sure that your design there, we spend as much time thinking about that as we do about the coding behind the scenes. So and it's still evolving. I'm not sure where it's going to lead, but I'm thinking the creativity and the higher level thinking skills are really what I don't think AI is going to be able to replicate, at least anytime soon for the kids. So I'm kind of thinking on those aspects of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and thinking about, like you said, the human side of it and the empathy that can be involved with when developing software, developing programming to solve human problems, right? That big thinking, and it is an interesting time because you look at the same comparison with writing, right? I can use Chat GPT or one of the other AI programs to generate pretty basic responses, pretty sophisticated responses at times too, with the right prompting. It doesn't mean that I should no longer possess the skill to write, but I don't necessarily need to do the writing myself, right? I can use it as a starter. I can use it to overcome a writer's block when I'm working on a piece. I can use it as something as that launch pad to evaluate, but I have to possess good writing skills to know whether or not what I'm reading is well written, to know whether or not I'm reading is accurate, right? So the same with the coding, like you, you know, thinking out in the future, when you develop curriculum and experiences where the kids are using these higher level thinking and thinking big picture and creative, they still need to possess, you still need to teach them and they still need to possess coding skills, but they might be using AI to generate code and it's going to be their job to evaluate it and make sure it's right. Just because it generates it doesn't mean it's accurate, but they don't necessarily need to write line by line everything if they possess that skill set. So it's definitely interesting to think about, and it just it I think that it's going to be very difficult over the next 2 or 3 5, I don't know how long, the short term, how we adjust to this as educators. But at the same time, I do think it's going to encourage classrooms where higher level thinking and critical thinking and creativity become more and more important and essential, because you just have to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking along those lines as well. I mean, we're going to be able to, I think we're going to be able to get to a point, if not already there, where, students are going to be able to tell the artificial intelligence, write me a function to do this task. So those small level tasks that we kind of abstract away, they're going to be able to do that fairly soon and fairly accurately. But it's okay, we have these functions. How do you put it together into a coherent program? And I think it's that kind of that higher level thinking about how to put the pieces together, the small pieces together, that I think is going to be, is going to keep us ahead. It's going to be able to distinguish us from, those tools that are going to be able to write those small, low level, those real low level things for us.
Have you had conversations with your students about AI and how it can code or its impact, or are you waiting to navigate that, or are
You
you
know,
waiting for
yeah,
sometimes you have
that's a
to wait
great
for
question.
administrator approval? Like what's your district's position slash your position on that right now?
Well, so it's interesting that you ask that because, as far as the district position, I'm not sure that they've come up with, a formal declaration about, okay, this is allowable and not. We're still kind of in the early days, but the funny thing is when you ask that, I mean, they've from our school network, they at this point they're still blocking it, so kids don't have access to it from our school network. But of course they have their devices, their own devices, their phones and whatnot, so they can always access it that way. And the few conversations I've had with kids, last year, for example, at the end of the year, I saw a kid, it looked like they were kind of feeding their physics homework questions into the chat gpt interface. And I kind of just we sat down and we talked about it, and it's actually turned out that he was doing that on a assignment that he'd already submitted just to be able to get like a different perspective. The way his teacher was showing him didn't quite make sense to him, so he kind of got a different perspective. So I think kids, if we um, if we trust them to be able to use it in a way that's going to augment and not replace thinking, and we show them how to do that, and then we trust them with that, I think they're going to surprise us in what they're going to be able to do with it. I think there's kind of a doom and gloom that people have and think, oh, they're going to use it to cheat, or they're going to use it to write their college essays, which they may, but I think that it's up to us as educators to be able to have those conversations about, okay, what are the ethical ways that we can use this? It's a tool, and like any other tool, it can be used for good or bad. And so let's start having those conversations with kids to hopefully steer them towards making those good decisions about how to use it.
Yeah, we can't ignore it, right? It's there. They have access to it. They know about it. We can't pretend that it's not there, and it's going to provide opportunities for cheating without a doubt. Just like 100 other resources out there are there, just the same as them calling their friends and saying, "Can I have a copy of your essay?" Right? The cheating is there. The cheating will always be there. Maybe it makes it a little bit easier, but it is a way to empower them as learners. And I've been comparing it to the introduction of what I would assume the introduction to a calculator was like in schools. It's not quite, I don't compare it to Google. I compare it to that because it was a tool that replaced the necessity to calculate by hand. You no longer had to be able to do 5 times 15, right? You had a tool. And what did that do? Did it turn us all into people that don't know how to do basic arithmetic? No, it did not. It turned us into people that now spend our time in school and out of school solving more complicated problems at a higher capacity, a higher rate, and at a younger age. And I am a huge proponent of the use of the calculator in classrooms at a very young age because it takes away a layer of stress on students and introduces a layer of higher order thinking. And it doesn't mean that they shouldn't know how to do their basic calculations. They should, but if they can, they should be using calculators because they need that tool to be able to focus on complicated word problems and things that have 3 or 4 steps along the process. So I really like to compare it to that because I think it's a tool that's going to allow us to do basic tasks to solve bigger picture problems, like you're saying, and be more
Uh-huh.
creative.
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, dovetailing on that observation about the introduction of calculators, I think about like the graphing calculator. It's I think the fear when it first started to come on the scene was, oh, okay, it's gonna take away kids learning about how to, intuit things about functions, but it's kind of had the opposite effect. I mean, like
Can I just ask
oh,
when did
sure.
that become kind of a normal tool used in schools?
It started, I think it really kind of appeared on the scenes. I wouldn't say like, I would say like early to mid 90s. So, it's been around for a while. And when it first started to come on the scene, I think, like I was saying, I think there was some hand wringing about, oh, kids are not going to be able to understand graphs anymore. But it's kind of had the opposite effect. I mean, in AP Calc, whereas in the past, if we wanted to kind of see the features or try to figure out what the features are of a graph and be able to make some higher order conclusions based off of that, we would have had to plot points by hand, and it would have taken us half the period. And by the time we have our graph, assuming we did it right, there's no then we would have lost sight of, okay, why did we do this? But with kids having the ability to, okay, let's take a look at, here's a complicated function, um, let's let's learn what we can about the situation from the graph. We can just graph it up, and we can stay focused on the higher level interpretation questions and analysis, as opposed to just the really mundane, tedious task of, okay, let's plot some points and let's get a graph. So I'm in total agreement about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have half the class they adjust the function in one way, half the class they adjust in
Hmm.
the other way. Now you have a compare and contrast.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
There's a lot of rich discussion that comes out of that. I
Absolutely.
totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
So seeing where you are in your career and the growth that you've gone through, I'm sure you work with new math teachers in your school in your district. What advice do you have for them as they I always like to ask for year 2 or year 3 advice for teachers. Year 1 advice is useless because they're just trying to survive, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Year
Yeah.
2,
Yeah.
year
Yeah.
3,
Uh-huh.
you kind of
Uh-huh.
got the management thing down. Like instructionally, what are some pieces of advice you have for those teachers to maybe approach the classroom in a way that you're doing now, where they can start to do it at an earlier stage in their career?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I think really for the younger teachers, it's really, I would say, I think about like the mistakes that I made as a beginning teacher, kind of getting in a rut and becoming kind of afraid to try new things. I think it's really to intentionally and regularly and consistently make sure that you're bringing in new practices into your classroom, so that you don't get stale, you don't get in a rut, you don't kind of just start doing the same thing over and over and assuming that's how it's always going to be. So intentionally bring new practices in on a regular basis, and don't be afraid to do that.
I love that. How do you how do you reflect on the success of those practices?
I think for me,
What's your way?
that's a huge, that's a really important question, because that's part of the cycle. I think, it's not only teaching the lesson, doing the assessment, and seeing what kids got from it, but it's a kind of reflective piece. So for me, the way I do it is I kind of keep a journal. I do kind of a formal journaling. So every day at the end of the day, I'll kind of just sit down, fire up the computer, and just start pre-writing about, okay, how did the day go? What happened during the day? What was good? What was bad? Um, and I'm the only audience for that. And that just that process, whether or not I come back later and actually look at it is almost beside the point. I mean, it's really just that process, that mental process of just kind of getting your thoughts down and just kind of just spewing them out, where you're not afraid to look bad in front of somebody else. It's just that kind of just having that kind of that voice, and just kind of really honestly showing and thinking about, how did the day go, that really just that process, there's something magical about it, that when you do that, and like I say, whether or not you actually come back to it, some people will, some people won't, but it's just that process for me that really kind of just completes the cycle.
I would 100% agree with that. And I think as a teacher, my best asset was my intention, my intention to reflect on my teaching practice, my ability to honestly reflect on what I did in the classroom, how I interacted with students, how I delivered a lesson. That ability to reflect in the moment, I just think has so much importance. And like you said, whether or not you journal it, whether or not you write it down somewhere, whether or not you revisit it, that 1 minute to 8 minute process of just thinking and reflecting will stick, right? It will have an impact as you progress through your career, without a doubt.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So as the 2023 teacher of the year, what has that experience been like, and are there any highlights that um, you expected and were great, or that you didn't expect and really were beyond your wildest dreams?
It was something that was totally unexpected, going into the process. If you'd asked me, a couple of years ago, what do you know about the Teacher of the Year program? I would have said very little. I was aware that every year, in our state, there was a Teacher of the Year that was, selected, but I knew nothing about the process. It was not something that was on my radar, or that I ever envisioned or aspired to. It was just, kind of knew it was in the background, but those are those are people who are superlative, and I'm just doing my day to day, just doing going about my day. But some things fell into place. I met some really great people, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, a year ago, October, they were having a ceremony at the state capitol, and and wow, I up until the moment that my name is announced, I would have never thought in a million years that it would have been me. But it's been a journey. I mean, it's been an amazing year. It's given me a lot of opportunities to really highlight the good stuff that's going on in all of our classrooms. I see it for me. I see myself really as just a figurehead. I'm just representing the great work that's going on in all of our classrooms. Whatever successes my kids have had, it's because of all the teachers that have come before. The kids that I have in my AP Calc class, they've come from our trig teacher, they've come from our Algebra 2 teacher, our geometry teacher. So all the great work that they're doing before me, I'm just really just reaping the benefits. So I'm really just kind of a figurehead. Um, and it's really just kind of about, I think it's really just uplifting all teachers is, what I see my role as, because there's so many good things going on in our schools. And I've had a chance, to visit a lot of schools this year and to see that. And really, I really want to make sure that people understand that it's not about me. It's about all the teachers that, are in our state doing some great things.
Did you have a chance to go to the White House yet?
That was when they brought us all to the last April. They brought us all to the White House, and that was, I'd never been to D.C. before, much less the White House, and I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be anywhere in the vicinity of, the president and first lady. So that was kind of an amazing experience. Yeah, it was kind of surreal. Um, but yeah, it was validating in the sense that, Dr. Biden, she's an educator, and we got to meet with Secretary Cardona, who's also an educator. So having those voices of educators in that space, that high space, really kind of was really kind of validating, and it was really nice to see that they're in that space sharing the voices of educators.
Right. So I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I don't want to cut it off, but I do want to be cognizant of our time, and so I'm going to transition into the exit ticket,
Sure.
which is the same four questions we ask every guest every week. So I will do really well with question 1 and 4. I might struggle with 2 and 3 because Matt typically asks those.
Okay.
So, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
I think the best thing that we can do as teachers is really to be that advocate for kids, to be that one adult in the building that they, can bring their questions, their problems to. And we can't necessarily do that with all kids, but there are kids out there who we're the perfect role model for those kids. Whoever you are, whether you're that, really outgoing teacher or whether you're the more introverted teacher, I think it's really just being yourself and recognizing that you are a role model for some kid out there and your role is really important. So it's really just establishing relationships really is what we can do really to support kids.
What is the best advice you've ever received, whether it be from a colleague, a supervisor, or maybe even a student?
I think it's to be yourself. The funny thing is, I started my career thinking that you had to be kind of like the Hollywood version of a superhero teacher and trying to fit into that mold. But when an older teacher kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, just be yourself," that really kind of changed my perspective on that. And that's so true. I mean, you can't be somebody who you're not or who you think you need to be. So just be yourself. And that's probably the best advice I've ever had.
No, it's so true. You can't look at your colleagues and say I need to be a teacher like that.
Uh-huh.
There might be elements of your colleagues that you want to pull away from or you want to utilize because you like the way they do it. But like you said, you have to do it in a way that you're going to be comfortable and successful with your kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the school year goes in waves. There are days and weeks where we struggle to survive. We're just insurmounted with tons of work, and other times where it feels a little bit easier. But in those moments of struggle, what would you like to say to our audience to help them power up?
I think it's just knowing that we're all there with you. As teachers, any teacher who's been in the classroom knows what you're going through. And, we've been through it ourselves. And so, we're there with you. Don't feel like you're alone. We got your back, we got your support. It's going to get better. We have those down times, but inevitably, and it's going to come from somewhere where you don't expect. It's going to be a kid who, comes in and shares something good about their day with you, and that's going to be all it takes. So just hang in there. It's gonna turn around at some point.
Love it. All right, last question. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
I think a lot of it comes from having those small successes. Like in my case, changing from a more traditional classroom to one where we focus on student engagement and interaction. And it's really just kind of taking those small steps and getting those successes. And like we were talking about, hearing that buzz and that just is so invigorating and so motivating, that really kind of keeps people trying to innovate. And I think also a lot of it comes from finding like-minded colleagues to support you, because when you're trying new stuff, inevitably you're going to have some failures and you're going to feel like, hey, I need to just kind of retreat back and do what was working before. But it's having kind of just one or two really is all you need, that support system. So it's really just kind of finding those right colleagues, those friends who are going to support you, as opposed to just kind of naysayers who are going to be negative all the time. So it's really finding that support system, I think, is really important.
I love that. I really appreciate your time with us tonight. So, last thing I just want to ask is, how can our audience connect with you, follow you on social media, if they enjoyed this conversation and they want to follow up and continue with your journey? What's the best way to do that?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and my handle is all the same in each platform. It's Dr. Mike Ida. So DrMikeIda.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's a topic we've talked about in terms of student-centered learning and empowering our learners, but at the high level of math and computer science, we haven't been able to dive in deep like we did tonight. So I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you to everyone who's been following our show. Show notes and links and links to Mike's social media handles will be found in our show notes page, which you can find on our website at powereduup.com, or wherever you're watching and listening to this, you can just scroll down and see it there as well. So once again, Mike, thank you so much. And as we powered out in this episode, you left us feeling powered up.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.